Okay. Again, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Stockton NAACP Town Hall that we're having this evening, titled Saving Our Lives. We are happy that all of you chose to join us in this event. We're looking forward to having a good dialogue, getting some great information, and leaving out of this with some direction and places where we're going to go in this community as a result of this opportunity. So again, I want to say thank you. I will ask now Reverend Harry Hodge, if you're on, to give us an opening prayer. If you've not gotten in, Reverend Green, will you step in? Go ahead.
He's muted.
You're not muted, we hear you.
Okay.
Can't hear.
Are you praying? Can't hear you. You are muted. You're muted, Reverend Green. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. God, we thank you for this inspiration of Jesus. And God, we grant that we love you with all our heart, our soul, and our mind, and that we love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And God, we pray that in these days of emotional tension and all the stuff, chaotic stuff that's going in the world, we pray, God, that you would bring a calm to this country, to this city, to this state. We pray, God, that whatever we say and do here today, that it will spring up in our everyday living, and that we may reform the laws and transform this world, that they may see that this is a better place to live in. We thank you, Lord. We pray for each and everyone that's present here tonight. We thank you for their participation. Pray that whatever we say and do here tonight, that it will glorify and magnify your most holy name. Remember all those who have lost loved ones in this compound pandemic. We pray for the families all over this land and country. We pray for the leaderships all over this land, and pray that we just come together to make this world a better place. We pray that you will bless this meeting tonight. Right now, we commend this meeting to you, asking for your blessings. Let heaven smile upon us today in the form of your love. For we know you with us, then you're more than the whole world against us. We pray now for the vindication of your holy name, for all the meaning and love that we find in Jesus Christ. It is in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Green. At this time, I will ask Deidre Davey to give us the meeting etiquette for the Zoom meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bivens. If we have any news media on the call, please enter your name in the chat box. This is a video conference where we expect participants' cameras to be on and positioned to your face. All participants' microphones will be on mute unless you are speaking. Also, please be mindful of your lighting and background setting. You will be able to join us by telephone as well. If you have a question for one of the speakers, please put it in the chat box below. Questions will be asked and answered within the time allocated for this purpose. Also, if we have dignitaries on the call, please put your name in the chat box below so we can introduce at some point during the program.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Davey. One of you have the video up?
No, President.
Okay, moving right along. I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening and your panelists, and they are as follows. Breanna Allen, NAACP Youth Council President. Elbert Holman, retired District Attorney Office Investigator and Sheriff's Officer. Tori Verber-Salazar, San Joaquin County District Attorney. Chief Erik Jones, Stockton Police Department. Sheriff Patrick Withrow, San Joaquin County Sheriff. Siku Millington, Chief of Police, Tracy, California. Zervan Matouf, Representative N.O.B.L E, that stands for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Mr. Mark Harris, Civil Rights Attorney from Sacramento, Mr. Doug Thorn, Civil Rights Attorney from Sacramento, and assisting me this evening will be members of the NAACP Stockton Branch Executive Committee, and we want to thank you all for your support and participation. Give yourselves a big thank you. Again, this evening is dedicated to Mr. George Floyd, Mr. Ahmaud Arbery, and Miss Breonna Taylor. And again, I'd like to say that the NAACP would like to extend an invitation to any and all of you to become a member. Our membership dues are $30 a year for a regular membership, and we are the union that comes into place when the other unions fall out of place when you're no longer employed. So with that, hopefully we are ready to show this brief video, and then we will move on with the program. Nope, okay, well, we're gonna move on with the agenda. So at this time, I would like to have each of you to do a 1-2-minute introduction. And before that happens, we know that we're all here tonight because of the uprisings that we're witnessing in Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit, Minneapolis, New York, Oakland, Washington, D.C., and Stockton as well, with civil protests. Many of the cities are a direct consequence of racism, bigotry, violence, and subjugation against Black people that has festered in this country for far too long. The murder of Mr. George Floyd and the subsequent lack of accountability by the police has set into motion what can only be described as a moment for the nation's conscience. I also want to say that when we see the picture of the officer's neck on Mr. Floyd, it's not just on Mr. Floyd. Many African Americans see that as a knee on the neck of Black people that has been there since our origination here in this country and on this land. So with that, we will move forward. We will start our 2-minute opening statements with Miss Breanna Allen, Youth President, Stockton NAACP. Breanna? And it's a reflection of how each panelist is seeing what's going on in America today.
Good evening, all. When I first heard about Mr. Floyd's death, I was outraged. Anyone who has a decent heart would be outraged. How can a human being kneel on this man's neck for 9 minutes? Sadly, I was not surprised hearing his death, but there were a countless amount of lives taken away before Mr. Floyd. And what was their crime? Simply being Black. See, this is not new at all. This type of inhumane treatment has been around for centuries. For the system was never made for us. America was built on institutional racism and on the backs of our own ancestors. My people have endured 400 plus years of generational trauma. And as you can see, it is still prevalent today. That's why it's important for our voices to be heard. And that's why I'm here and speaking out today. If you are neutral during this time, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If you are not Black and you are silent during these times of need, you are also part of the problem. Sadly, they love our culture when it's convenient, but some are not present when it's time to speak about the injustices of our system. We need to fight for those who were wrongfully murdered, fight for our ancestors, fight for those 4,000 Black bodies who were swinging in the southern breeze, fight for George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and many more. This is not some trend. These are our lives on the line. So when you post something regarding this racial crisis, don't just post it and go on with your day. Be about the movement. Without action, nothing will get done. Take the time to sign those petitions. Spread awareness, and if you can, go out and protest. Recognize your white privilege and use it for good. Recently, Trump has brought out the National Guard. He'd rather go to war with his own country than simply fire 4 policemen. How many more Black lives have to be murdered in order for you to see that we are human? We need to humanize Blackness for all that it's worth. My people are not a threat. Your white supremacy is. Nina Simone once said, "I'll tell you what freedom means to me. No fear." History will continue to repeat itself until the oppressor stops feeding their children's minds with hatred and see with their own eyes the pain that they've caused us for centuries. Until we stop fearing for our lives and worrying about whether our Black men, women, and children will return home safe, then we will never truly be free. Because if not now, when? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And next, we will have Chief Erik Jones to give a 2-minute introduction and reflection.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I just want to start with this. I care. I absolutely care. What happened in Minneapolis to George Floyd is totally unacceptable. And as a police chief, I can say that definitively. For us, certainly it was outside our training and treatment. There was a lack of dignity, to say the least. And as a person, I was deeply saddened and disturbed. To me, this was a clear injustice, and you need to know my stance as your police chief, and how this was an absolute inhumane treatment. And we've seen some, as Mr. Bivens said, some peaceful demonstrations here, which I'm very proud of how our community and police department interacted. For example, at the demonstration yesterday, although there were some tense moments, ultimately there was a shaking of hands between the officers and those that were demonstrating. I certainly hope we continue to have peaceful protests. The demonstration organizers were amazing. Our police officers in a position did well, very well. We recognize the difference between protesters and those with the ill intent to vandalize, create damage, or hurt others. We have, and we will keep doing it, the important work of trust building. And that's working towards stronger legitimacy for our community and always looking at training policies and practices. Years ago, we began Racial Reconciliation Project. Many of you were aware and were involved. Quick snapshot of what that was and will continue to be are courageous discussions, and me as a police leader acknowledging the painful history of the badge, from early slavery patrols to being present at lynchings, suppression of civil rights, to current day issues. So not just things over the decades, but even things current, and how it taints our badge for the many, many great, good officers out there. But the badge reflects that, or I should say carries the burden, and we just need to know that. It's about having an understanding of the historical racial injustices and systems creating disparities over the decades. That's something we teach our officers, and it's something we have some very difficult conversations with our community members in those. So I just wanted you to know I'm absolutely resolved to keeping the peace and working on community and policing trust issues. It's never a destination. It is a constant path. We should always be trying to get better as a police department, be a learning organization. And as a leader, I need to stay committed, and you should expect this of me, whether it's when things are easier or not. And I have zero tolerance policy for racism. And I'll just end on this.
Okay.
It's about accountability, training, and policy, but also always working on the police culture.
All right, thank you very much, Chief Jones. And remember, this is a 2-minute opening and a reflection. Next up is Tori Verber-Salazar, District Attorney, San Joaquin County.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to reflect upon what is going on.
Speak up just a little bit, Tori.
Sure. Let me see if I turn it up. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening and reflect upon what is going across the United States of America. First and foremost, to Mr. Floyd, to his family and friends, for the horrific loss and pain and suffering that they've endured. This is nothing but a murder, and that's what it was. And to see it on video and to witness it has raised all of the harm and trauma to each and every one of us. And we're trying to figure out how to handle it, how to process it, and what we can do. And protesting has been a beautiful experience here in San Joaquin County. We've had peaceful protest after peaceful protest, working with and in partnership with law enforcement to ensure the safety and well-being of everybody. And it is an example, shining example for the United States of America of the work that we can do when we work together. But now we have to do even more work, and that is come to the table and find solutions. We have to drive the change that we so desperately need. The change is long overdue. As Breanna said so eloquently and beautiful to start us off tonight, it's a 400-year journey to get us to this place. So we need to accept and address the responsibility for the roles that we've played in the past. We must seek forgiveness for the sins that have been committed. And we must come to the table with each and every one of you to find the solution to live in a world in where justice is equal and fair. I am the District Attorney of San Joaquin County, and in some circles, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer. I don't know why they say that, but that's what they say. And as such, it's imperative that I have the courage to do what is right, to ensure that justice is equal and fair to each and every one of us, and to ensure when any injustice occurs, that we act swiftly, efficiently, and effectively to root out the evil that it causes. So I want to take this moment to offer my sincere condolences at the terrible loss, but I also want to thank this community for doing what is right and raising their voice in a powerful, powerful way and letting us hear. And trust me, change is coming, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. Significant change is coming. But I want to also say that I'm proud of San Joaquin County. They're raising their voice in a way that will drive change and hopefully heal some of the harm. And I'm grateful, very grateful. So thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you very much, Tori. Appreciate it. Next, we have Sheriff Patrick Withrow. Sheriff, you're on.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's such an honor. It's such a blessing for me to be in this position as sheriff here in San Joaquin County, and to represent the men and women that work here at the sheriff's office, and to work closely with Chief Jones and all the other law enforcement agency and the DA, and to have this opportunity in this position to finally have a voice in this, to really try and make a difference here. You know, we are blessed here in San Joaquin County that we have leadership that cares so deeply, that has worked hard on this recently and in the recent past to try and lead our state and our country in these changes. And there have been a lot of progress that we've made here. I think that shows in how we can go out and peacefully protest and work together to get our voices heard and make the changes that need to be done. But we have such a long way to go. And I am just honored to be part of this, to work closely with all of you, with all our leaders, and to make sure that once again we've witnessed this horrific action by someone wearing a uniform and a badge, as Chief Jones says, that brings such dishonor to all of us. And our goal here, I know, and speaking with all the chiefs of police, that our goal here is to always bring honor to this uniform and this badge, to try and learn the changes that need to be done. As a white man, I cannot possibly say that I understand what people of color have been through. All I can do is attempt to continue to learn, to do what we need to do to make these changes and to be part of the solution. And so it's an honor to be here tonight, and thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to learning as we go here tonight.
Thank you, Sheriff. Next, we will have Mr. Elbert Holman, former investigator for the DA's office and former Vice Mayor of Stockton. Mr. Holman.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the NAACP for putting this forum on. I think this is a time now where we actually really need to get together and discuss these issues. As I watched that video of what took place in Minneapolis, it conjured up old memories of things that I've investigated in the past, and made me start to wonder, why are we still dealing with this thing? My law enforcement career started 49 years ago. I've been through all of the issues that have been happening between that 49-year period. I've sat on boards, we've discussed changes, we discussed solutions. we've tried to implement different changes on various levels. Even on the city council, I sat on the Public Safety Policy Committee for all cities in the state of California, discussing issues of police conduct and those types of things. And yet here in the year 2020, we're still seeing things that happen in Minneapolis. But I have to say one thing, I am encouraged. And one of the things that I'm encouraged about is that even though this is so tragic, and my heart goes out to the Floyd family and the others that have been victims of this type of behavior by law enforcement, I'm encouraged by the fact that as I look at the diversity of the protest and the protest participants, it's not just Black people standing up saying, hey, something's wrong with this. I can even remember just recently now when the Minneapolis tape came out of individuals that I used to work with in law enforcement, on patrol, Caucasian, some even Trump supporters, if you will, called me up and they were just disgusted with what they had seen that happened in Minneapolis. I think now is the time. We have to stand up. We have to be proactive. Like the sheriff and Tori said before, we have to be, we have to have the courage to implement the change that comes about. But we need to be at the table. It's going to take all of us to dialogue. It's going to take all of us to come up with the solutions. But once we come up with them, then we have to implement and be proactive and do what needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holman. We appreciate it. Next, we have Chief Siku Millington, Chief of the Tracy Police Department. That's not him.
Can you see me okay?
No, we're seeing me. There we go.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everyone. And I want to thank you for inviting me to this much needed dialogue. I want to thank the NAACP and those who have come before me to speak up for right, speak up for truth. So I, again, forgive me, I'm at standing by for a city council meeting, so my earphones in. I have to say, I echo the sentiments of my colleagues who spoke before me, Chief Withrow, I'm sorry, Sheriff Withrow and Chief Jones and Tori, the DA. And I have to say, first of all, my heart goes out to the Floyd family. When I saw that tragic moment play out on video, I was hurt to the core. I was bothered. I was bothered that we've made so many strides in our law enforcement profession. I felt like we were at a moment where we're now taking 10 steps back. I know why I joined the profession, to be honest and to be true and to be caring and to be empathetic. And I didn't see that play out on that video, and it did hurt me to the core. Being a Black man in a blue uniform, I have a very distinct reality. I don't shy away from that. I like to think that I joined this profession for the right reason. I ascended to the rank that I ascended to in order to hold myself accountable and my department accountable, my colleagues accountable. So to speak up for right didn't seem like a hard thing for me to do. And I absolutely spoke out about this immediately, saying that it was not what we teach. It's not what we expect. It's not what we want in law enforcement. And it's our job to weed out the bad and encourage the good. I've seen some traumatic images on television. I've been a part of a lot of those images over the years, having worked in Oakland for almost 20 years. You can only imagine. It bothered me to see us back there again, sort of repeating the same mistakes of the past. And so, again, I don't know if there's anything that can be said to help calm or comfort the Floyd family during this time. But I want, if they ever were to hear this, I want to apologize on behalf of those officers who violated the community trust, who didn't think about that man's feelings while he was there suffocating, dying at their hands. So, and that troubles me. I have a 21-year-old son, 25-year-old daughter, and I was comforted to know that my colleagues stood up right away, all of the national associations, chiefs of police, and spoke out against this act of violence, this murder, pretty much unanimously. And that made me proud. It made me proud that my colleagues would stand up for right, much like I do. I was happy also to know that being new to my department, 5 months now, I had an immediate conversation with my executive staff and my department as a whole. I researched our policies to ensure that we as a department are following the most contemporary policing practices. And it's not acceptable to stand by and watch wrong. It's not acceptable. It's against policy to not report misconduct and excessive force. It's just not tolerated. So again, I want to thank you for being here. I feel very honored, and also for Ms. Breanna, forgive me for not having your last name, knowing that young people like you are our future, hearing you speak so eloquently about the atrocity that played out before our eyes is very comforting. And know that we stand with you and all of the other members of the community who are speaking out at this very moment.
Thank you, Chief. And we will come back to you, and you'll have an opportunity to talk about some of what you just talked about. So thank you very much, and welcome to San Joaquin County.
Thank you.
Next, we have Attorney Doug Thorn. Doug, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm sorry that it's under these circumstances. George Floyd was murdered in a heinous display of complete indifference to human life. As I saw that officer sitting on his neck, it was all I could think about was this man does not care about people. There will be more George Floyds because there are more officers like that on our force. We need to make more effort to screen for compassionate people to do our police work. We do not need to have people like that officer on our force. There will be more George Floyds because there are more officers who refuse to intervene when they see their fellow officers break the law. The culture of silence and retaliation is real, and it needs to be quashed. We will see more George Floyds because there are more supervisors who do not do their job and intervene when they see officers breaking the law. There will be more George Floyds because we have weak training programs that do not bridge the huge divide that I see between the great things that we are hearing from the chief and the sheriff and what actually happens on the street. There will be more George Floyds because there are laws in place that make it difficult or impossible for the chief and the sheriff to get rid of bad officers. Those laws must change. There will be more George Floyds because there are laws in place that value a $20 bill over life. Those must change. There will be more George Floyds because there has not been enough done to resolve the distrust between law enforcement and the oppressed communities. There must be a better effort, and I was very happy to hear Chief Jones put that as a priority for his department. There will be more George Floyds because there's not enough young people who pursue jobs in law enforcement so that our law enforcement departments look more like their communities. There will be more George Floyds as long as we segregate ourselves and don't make a genuine effort to meet, befriend, hear, understand, respect, support, and love our neighbors who look different than we do. I too was encouraged by the rainbow of colors that I see in the protest and have hope in that change. I went back and looked at a video of the Selma March, and it is much different. George Floyd did not die in vain. There are 4 less bad officers on the street, and we have a national spotlight on these issues again that may provide us with the opportunity to make some of the changes that need to be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Next, we have Attorney Mark Harris from Sacramento, civil rights attorney. Mark, you're on.
Thank you so much. I apologize that my camera is not functioning. I did a 4-hour lecture earlier today on Zoom, and unfortunately, I won't be able to have you see my face. Probably better for you. I have a face for radio, they say, Mr. President. So it probably is a good thing. Let me get right into this. First, I want to thank President Bivens and the Stockton branch of the NAACP for putting on this amazing event with over 200 participants. Bobby, that's a big deal in these days and time to get 200 people to stop what they're doing and to participate. So I want to thank you and the NAACP of Stockton, the Stockton branch, for that. First, let me be clear. Black Lives Matter, exclamation point. Let me start with that. There seems to be some confusion about what that means. I have marched with Black Lives Matter. I've represented Black Lives Matter here in Sacramento. A commentator with the Sacramento Kings was forced to resign today for saying all lives matter. This is not a symbol. This is not an empty statement. Black Lives Matter. We shouldn't have to say it. I am a man was the term that was used in the 60s during the civil rights movement, when African-American men had to reinforce and remind America that we too were men. Here we are now, and these tragedies continue to decimate our community on a disproportionate level. This is a problem beyond the Black community, but its epicenter is in the Black community. This contagion of oppression affects all disenfranchised and non-privileged people. You know, I will say, and I hope no one takes this the wrong way, but hearing law enforcement, even the law enforcement assembled here today, Chief Jones is a dear friend. I consider him a friend, and others of you I've not had the pleasure of meeting. I was proud to hear the district attorney acknowledge that it was murder in Minnesota, and I hope that in fact there'll be a prosecution consistent with that. But it rings hollow. It's like you're just discovering today this is a problem. You apologize to the Floyd family, but how about to the Stephon Clark family? How about to the Joseph Mann family? How about to the Dejan Flanaugh family? How about to Breonna Taylor's family? How about to Ahmaud Arbery's family? These are just some of the most recent. Mann and Flanaugh happened right down the road in Sacramento. The others are nationally celebrated. Our law firm, Ben Crump, PLLC, which I'm a proud member of and the managing partner of for the Sacramento and Central Valley office, represents the Clark family, the Taylor family, the Arberry family, and the Floyd family, and will probably, sadly, as my colleague, Mr. Thorn, pointed out, be representing more families before this thing is over. When is enough enough? When law enforcement recognizes it has a problem, not just when it's under the glare of the national spotlight, when someone happens to hit record on a video, police transparency and accountability, in my mind, starts and stops with the chief. Starts and stops with the chief. We've now seen chiefs fired in Oakland, California by the Citizens Review Board. We just saw this weekend the chief in Lexington, Kentucky fired, as he should have been. The chief of Minneapolis, with all due respect, should be fired, even though he's Black and Latinx. The chief or the sheriff, respectively, is the one who has the responsibility to make sure that the core is the core, committed ethically and in every principled way that you can imagine, consistent with what policing is supposed to be, to protect and to serve our community. Final 2 notes. Every community should have a citizens oversight committee with some real teeth. Stockton is no exception to that. I'm not talking about a window dressing, impotent citizens complaint board or police review committee. I'm talking about one with some real teeth. And I hope Stockton will have that in its near future. The ability to assess whether the behavior of the chief and or law enforcement was appropriate or inappropriate. That should come. And finally, our community, Black folks don't get off this either. We had in Minnesota a Black attorney general, a Democratic governor, a Democratic lieutenant governor, a Black trans vice president of the city council, a separate Black city council member, a Black director of public safety, one of the most dynamic Black Muslim members of Congress in the entire United States House of Representatives, and a Black Latinx police chief, and yet George Floyd was still assassinated on the streets of Minneapolis. That is absolutely abhorrent, and we need to hold our leaders accountable as well.
Thank you very much, Attorney Mark Harris. And that was very well stated, because we look for accountability from everybody, and nobody gets to escape and get off the hook. Next, we have Mr. Zervan Matouf, who is the representative for N.O.B.L E, which stands for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives.
Yes, Zervan Malouf is my name. And again, I am the local chapter president of the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of N.O.B.L E. First and foremost, I want to thank the NAACP for inviting me to this forum. Now, N.O.B.L E is condemning the police tactics and actions that led to the death of Mr. Floyd. N.O.B.L E is very concerned and alarmed of the deaths of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. Our condolences and prayers go to each of their families and to the millions that have been touched. The senseless deaths demands that justice be fair, transparent, and equal. N.O.B.L E's motto is justice by action. Now, who is N.O.B.L? N.O.B.L is the largest premier collection of African-American law enforcement professions in the nation. Our members lead over half of the nation's largest municipal and county law enforcement agencies. N.O.B.L helped start on their accreditation of law enforcement agencies, which emphasizes national professional standards for effective leadership, policing, and operations. N.O.B.L is dedicated to real community service, community policing, and action, attitude, and service to the community. N.O.B.L is a leader of law enforcement agencies towards effectively moving towards the 21st century policing. Now, what is N.O.B.L doing? N.O.B.L has a three-point strategy to ensure that justice and address systematic issues related to the judicial system that result in the deaths of Floyd, Trayvon, Tamira, Laquan, Sandra, Eric, Freddie, Walter, Brown, Grant, and the countless others. Point one, we want a robust media strategy to push our message. Two, we're leveraging our influence at the local, state, and federal levels. We had private discussions with DOJ, DHS, Congress, the White House, and the FBI director with the sole purpose of demanding justice and recommendations to stop further preventable use of force deaths. And three, we are deploying every resource at our disposal to permanently address existing use of force principles, implementing 21st century policing practices, including mandatory de-escalation training, prohibiting restraints on the neck and above, mandatory requiring officers to render aid immediately after a situation, and mandatory officers to intervene where physical force has been applied when needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments and your participation. And now it's time for us to really get down to what we're here for. And we are here to discuss local issues and local policing strategies and practices. And our team is ready. Our team is set to go, and we are here to try to bring information and get input from the community on this subject. So to start out the questioning, we will start with Mr. Naji Zarif, Executive Committee member, and he will be questioning Chief Erik Jones. Naji, take it ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you again, Chief Jones, for joining us this evening, have this important discussion. I have two questions to start off with for you. The first question I have is with the respect to the use of force and specifically excessive force. And we'd like to have you address the definition of excessive force by the Stockton PD and how those infractions are handled.
And let me interject. You have 1 minute to answer the question.
You thought I went too long last time, didn't you?
Yeah.
All right. So yes, we in our policies are online. So part of our transparency efforts are to put those out so that everyone can see them. Actual definition is in there, but it's essentially an officer using force that is not reasonable under the circumstance, under the totality of the circumstances. Have we terminated officers for using excessive force? Yes. Do I want to? No, but it's my responsibility because everything's about policy, leadership, accountability, training, and oversight. And so we have to have the right policies in place, make sure we're training them, and remember that culture eats policy for lunch every time. So you can have all these policies in place, and we have a policy that does not allow for what we saw in Minneapolis at all. We have a policy that says an officer is complicit if they're not doing something about it to stop another officer from doing it. We have those policies, but if we're not holding officers accountable as well, so we have an internal affairs process like many agencies do. I have no problem asking for outside Department of Justice or whoever coming in to take a look. I'm always open to anybody coming and looking at our investigations. And lastly, we have an early warning system like they do in Oakland where Saku came from, but where we actually aren't just waiting for complaints, we're looking for warning signs of maybe where there's smoke, maybe there's fire. So we have those components in place, but we're always looking at what else we can do to expand.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. And the second question that we have for you, Chief Jones, speaks to the comments and the points that Mr. Harris made with respect to a Citizens Oversight Committee or Commission. And specifically, we want to get your thoughts on the establishment of a review board or an oversight commission with subpoena power that has some teeth with it, that'll allow those folks to review the actions of either the chief or law enforcement officers' prior acts.
Sure. So we have a community advisory board. I recognize it's not a review board with actual subpoena powers like that, but the advisory board does give me input in policies and do review of policies. When it comes to civilian review boards, we do not have one in Stockton, and there may be a day when we do. I'd say there's about as many types of civilian review boards out there as there are civilian review boards out there because there's just so many different models. But there's some good places to look in the 21st Century Policing report. And there's a lot of recommendations on as you search to do one that fits to ensure that it doesn't become political, which some of the research shows it can go that way, but I'm always open to that.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to move it, and we're going to be able to come back a little later on with other questions, and we'll have an open session as well. Next, we have Mr. Jerome Clay, Second Vice President, NAACP, and he will be questioning Mr. Mark Harris.
Mr. Harris, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, brother. I got two
Good
questions.
to hear your voice, counselor. Good to see you.
Thank you. I have two questions for you.
Yes,
the first
sir.
question is, for the 4 officers involved in Minnesota,
Yeah.
the incident, what do you think they ultimately face? Criminal charges or civil charges? What do you think they face as it relates to the death of George?
That's an excellent question from an excellent lawyer. Thank you for asking it. We're suing them, so we obviously feel that there is some level of civil liability facing the officers and facing the city. We definitely feel that, and it's going to be a large sum of money, we believe, that ultimately will come out of that. We know no sum of money can bring the Floyd family back their lost loved one. I saw his 6-year-old daughter and the mother of his 6-year-old daughter earlier today, and it literally brings tears to your eyes. So that's the civil part. The civil part will run through the course. We're representing the family, and I dare say I think that we'll give them strong representation. On the criminal side, I was disappointed to see only one officer arrested, the main perpetrator, but there were 3 officers who actually were a part of the assassination of Mr. Floyd. 3 were on his back, one most celebrated with the very famous shot that we've all seen of his knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd, but there were 2 other officers who were on Mr. Floyd's back through the whole experience. All 3 of those officers should face, in my opinion, at minimum, liability for second-degree murder. In the state of Minnesota, the penal code defines second-degree murder as having the absence of premeditation, but definitely with deliberation. In this case, 8 minutes and 46 seconds on Mr. Floyd's back would qualify as deliberation as far as I'm concerned and meet the standard of second-degree murder. So I hope that's what the state of Minnesota will ultimately move forward with.
Okay, that's good. And then your second question, you kind of touched on it in your opening statement. But here in the Valley, what do you think needs to be changed immediately to hold the police accountable in our community?
Chief Jones, as much as I love you, I got to disagree with you completely on what you just said a minute ago. I wasn't going to jump in there. I think Mr. Zarif asked an excellent question about police accountability. Yeah, there are a number of models, but there are only a couple of templates that have been used throughout California. The most aggressive in Oakland, California, where in Oakland now they have the power to terminate the chief. That is the most extensive power that any police commission has that I'm aware of. Mr. Zarif raised an excellent point about subpoena power. I understand there's the Police Officers' Bill of Rights. I understand they're civil servants. I was on the police commission in Berkeley. I was on the police commission in Oakland, and I chaired the Civil Service Board in Oakland. And it was frustrating to deal with this, but deal with it we may. No more advisory, no more input only. We need authority among citizens. The police are supposed to be serving us. No disrespect, Chief, and to the sheriff and everyone else who's assembled. You work for us. So the bottom line is that it's not political. Yes, it is political. It should be political. It's a community service that police and law enforcement, the role that they play, and they should be held accountable to the community by the community.
Thank you, Brother Mark.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clay and Mr. Harris. Now we will have Professor Evan Wade, another executive committee member of the NAACP, and he will ask a couple of questions of our district attorney, Tori Verber-Salazar.
Attorney Salazar, it's good to see you today. I have a visual on my screen for the audience to see. And this visual deals with a commemoration reflection of 99 years ago. It was 99 years ago yesterday that this picture was taken. This picture comes from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the massacre that happened there. If you don't know the history, it was the police chief of Tulsa, Oklahoma, who deputized white men to go attack Greenwood, the black section of Oklahoma. The next day, the governor had brought in the National Guard to put order in the city. The National Guard, however, they're going to arrest, criminalize the black residents of Greenwood. What you see here are black men separated by the National Guard from their wives and children being marched down to the fairgrounds to be held. And so this iconic picture, and in this iconic picture is black men marching down the street, hands up, don't shoot. As Erik Jones mentioned, our police chief in the opening statement, there's a long history of police abuses in this country. Policing has a very troubling past. It was an enforcement agent of slavery, starting with slave patrols, but also an enforcement agent of Jim Crow as well. Now that we are post-civil rights movement, there are questions dealing with DAs, district attorneys, and the ability to have accountability by in terms of charges brought against those who are alleged to conduct police misconduct. So I have a couple questions I'd like to ask. The first question is, what is included in your policy of investigating police abuse? Is it possible to establish a local policy where allegations of police abuse cannot be investigated by local prosecutors because we know self-policing does not work?
Thank you for the question. And let me give you a little history. In 1993, who is now Justice Murray, William Murray of the appellate court, was the deputy district attorney and the head of our supervisor of our homicide unit here, and realized that we were not doing this right, and did one of the most innovative things decades before anybody else was, and created the officer involved protocol here in San Joaquin County that requires multiple agencies to be involved in these investigations. So when you have a critical incident, you have the employer agency, you have the sheriff, CHP, if they're depending on the role of it, and you have the Department of Justice at the state level, and you have my office. I have 55 seasoned investigators in my office, averaging 22 years of experience. Every interview, every part of this investigation must have representation from all of these agencies to ensure the integrity of it. Now, I know people would probably think civilian would be good, but we don't have civilians in any other investigation. We have law enforcement with a heightened skill and training. The part of the role that my office plays is oversight to ensure the integrity of the process and to ensure that every step along the way that we are complying with best evidence practices and the best tools and resources that we have. Because of that MOU, over the years, we've modified and changed it and learned from it. And in this past, since I've been in office since 2015, we've made significant changes. And right now there's an MOU pending for a new MOU that was created by the community. We had a community advisory board that came in and gave input into what our MOU should be for these officer involved critical incidents. We also had officers involved in the development of it and a legal team in the development of it. And they worked collaboratively and they hashed out difficult issues. And then the most important thing on that community board was I had mothers whose sons had been murdered. And they talked about their journey. And they told us what we needed to do and to change this protocol. And they gave us the power and the courage to make the necessary changes that we did. So here in San Joaquin County, I put our protocol against just about anybody in the United States because of what Justice Murray did way back in 1993. Because it allows us to ensure the integrity of the process, to ensure that there is efficiency and effectiveness. Now, it's not perfect. Don't get me wrong. We should be quicker to the decision. We should be fast tracking this a little bit more. I agree with that, and I hear that. But what we did learn from these mothers was that we needed to treat people better. We needed to treat the family members of the decedent in these cases better. We need to include them in the process, and we do. And since that time, we now meet with them regularly, the chief or the sheriff or whoever's involved in the case and myself. We meet with them with updates. We keep them informed. We meet with them when we make a decision. We spend 2-3 hours, allow them to look at the evidence and go through the process, and we explain to them why we made the decision. And obviously, they're not going to be happy with the decision we made, but we tell them how and why we got there. And then we also do the same for the officers and their families, because we don't want officers on the street who are not prepared to do what they need to do and do it well and do it right. And then we meet with the administrations if they choose to, and we discuss our concerns about this case. And then we release it to the public. We release at least 25 pages of documentation.
Okay, and we need to move.
Sorry. So we do that in order to increase trust and transparency in the community. And these changes came. These were driven in large part by our community board that gave us the direction to do so. So we look at that. Every case that law enforcement sent us over involving officers that was not related to a critical incident, so say it was a driving under the influence or some other, whatever the case may be, we evaluate each and every one of those cases and we charge them. And if we had any questions or concerns or any concerns about a potential conflict, we sent it to the Attorney General. And just yesterday, I announced and I've asked every DA in the United States of America to take a pledge to not accept financial support or endorsement from law enforcement associations and law enforcement agencies and unions. And today I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to ask every law enforcement association and every law enforcement union to say they will no longer endorse financially or on paper any district attorney to end that conflict. Because it is, whether it's a perceived conflict or a true conflict, it is a conflict. And when I started in 2014 to run for office for the first term,
Madam
sorry.
I'm gonna have to cut you off. We have a short response. Okay, next question, Mr. Wade.
Yes, so second question, and thanks again for being here to take these questions. And so when it comes to police misconduct, we've seen images of some troubling circumstances, in particular this year dealing with the sheriff and what has happened in the jail here locally. Has there ever been a successful prosecution of a police officer for misconduct under your current policy? That's been since 1993.
Yes, we've charged 2 officers, one with vehicular manslaughter, and that case pled. And the next case was scheduled for jury trial in March, and COVID kicked it back out, probably until the fall. And that case is in regards to a shooting from a Stanislaus County deputy that came into San Joaquin County and shot and killed a woman. So the first case, like I said, resolved through a plea, and the second case is pending jury trial.
Okay, thank you very much on this segment, and we will come back and have more discussion along the lines of where Mr. Wade and our district attorney just traveled down the road. Next, we have Brandon Thorn, and he will have a couple of questions for Sheriff Pat Withrow. And remember, we have a short window on the answer, the 1-minute window.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Sheriff Withrow. I have a question for you here. Can a no-neck restraint policy be established in the policy department and sheriff's office immediately?
Yes, it can. We go by the Lexipol policy, which is kind of the standard policy now that law enforcement is using throughout. So we have a procedure about going through, looking at our policies on a regular basis and reviewing them. And we meet with everybody involved when we want to change a policy and look at that. So it absolutely can be done, and it should be something that we look at. We've already, as you know, probably in the past, we've looked and adjusted the carotid restraint type of use of force policy. So, we're really getting away from any type of training of restraints where the neck is involved or damage can be done there because of what has happened in the past. So yes, we can absolutely look at that.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for that, Sheriff, and we will probably be back to you here shortly at the end. But thank you so much for that.
All right, Brandon. I guess Tori hogged all my time, didn't you?
No, sir. If we got any more questions, go ahead and put them in the chat briefly for the Sheriff. Sheriff still has more time.
All right.
We actually have another question for the Sheriff.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
Do you have it, Brandon?
I do not, Mrs. Bivens.
Okay. So, good evening, Sheriff.
Good evening.
This question just states, we have seen in many instances where Black youth, men and women, have complied with the sheriff's deputies, and the outcome in many instances was mistreatment. How do you investigate this, and how do you prevent this from happening in the future?
Well, it surprises me to say that, because we're very proactive about making sure that our officers treat everyone, properly and with respect. Every officer that has been hired since I've been here in the year and a half, I meet with personally to lay down my expectations of them and how they will treat the citizens of San Joaquin County, and that is unacceptable behavior. In the time that I've become sheriff, our citizen complaints have dropped dramatically. I believe because of the way that the culture that we're beginning to change and build here at the department about respect for all people. And but we expect people to let us know, and we will act immediately upon that. As it was mentioned with the incident at the jail, we immediately, the subject that was injured at the jail thought another department had done that injury, and I was the one who came out and said absolutely not. It was our officers that were involved in that incident, and we immediately started taking corrective actions. And as the DA mentioned, our protocol, because I wanted to be transparent, not only did I install cameras where they told me legally I couldn't install cameras, we got a thing that allowed us to do that. I invoked the protocol on that case so that my office stepped back. didn't do the investigation, and Chief Jones and all the other members and the DAs took that investigation over. So we expect people to let us know. We demand that people let us know when our officers are not behaving as they are supposed to. No one wants to work with an officer that is misbehaving, especially us. So please, we need to know about these things and investigate them immediately.
We appreciate your honest response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for those two questions, Brandon and Luana. Now we will bring Luana Bivens to question or to ask the questions of Tracy Chief of Police, Mr. Siku Millington.
Good evening again, Chief Millington. Are you there?
I am. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. So my first question for you is, what is your department doing to utilize non-threatening tools? And then also, do you have a non-lethal weapons division?
Okay, great question. Thank you. This is actually very timely. Again, as I mentioned, I'm relatively new to this department, and part of understanding the department and the culture was to meet with our defensive tactics, our use of force instructors to understand what's trained with regards to force and de-escalation. As you know, I come from a department that was under oversight, very heavy on policy and guidelines as to how force is applied, how force is investigated. What I found is that this department is engaged in de-escalation. It's embedded in each application of force, and we're currently working on a standalone de-escalation policy. I looked at the policies with regards to use of the taser, use of defensive tactics, and use of lethal force to ensure that we are looking at de-escalation as a priority in each of the policies, as well as the training, the application of force. So that's what I know we've done thus far. The department is also engaged in procedural justice training. This is the first level of de-escalation, in my opinion, in my expertise, where we first verbalize our requests for compliance and then engage in tactics that are reasonable to gain compliance, and then immediately de-escalate once we've gained that compliance. I hope that answers the question with regards to what our department is doing. Was there a second part to that question?
I think you completely answered. It was the having a non-lethal weapons division.
So we do not have a non-lethal weapons division. We do have force options, and we have less lethal options. Again, I mentioned a few: the use of the taser, or otherwise known as the ECW, impact weapons, the 40 millimeter launcher, which again is meant to be a less lethal option in the event that that's the force that's necessary for that given instance. But to say I have a less lethal division, I do not.
Okay.
Nor, to be honest with you, nor do I have the manpower to do that.
Okay. Okay, we understand. Do you feel that excessive force should be a standard countywide? And the second part of this question that was submitted was, how do you define excessive force in your department?
Okay, so two-part question. You asked that if,
if it could, excessive force could be a standard countywide.
So I believe, well, first of all, the policy that excessive force is a nationwide standard with regards to law enforcement and force. There's reasonable force by Graham standards, where force is used to reasonably overcome resistance. Looking at the severity of the offense, the act of resistance, and the threats to officer or to citizenry. So anything outside of reasonable force can be considered excessive force. So I'm not sure if you're asking the question if it's can be defined differently. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're just asking in your opinion, and it might be so that you can inform the general public this evening. Is it a standard community-wide in Selma?
So it is.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Absolutely. And
And I
then
think the second question, part of that question was,
how do you define excessive force?
yeah, any force that's not reasonable given the circumstances, anything outside of policy and training.
Well, very good. Well, thank you very much. That ends my 2 questions for you.
Okay, thank you very much, Luana, and also Chief Millington. The next questions we have coming up again from our second Vice President, Mr. Jerome Clay, or Attorney Jerome Clay. And so, Jerome, you're on with Mr. Doug Thorn.
Mr. Thorn, how are you doing?
Doug, are you still on?
Yeah, he's mute.
Yes, I am.
So for everybody who doesn't know Doug Thorn, he used to defend the police for about 30 years, Doug?
No, you're giving away my age. I did it for too long.
And so now he's on the plaintiff side. And so trying to see your perspective.
You're cutting out, Jerome.
You're frozen, but while he's frozen, I'll go ahead and ask the question. What are my rights if I know if I've been discriminated by the police or the sheriff's department?
Your rights are to pursue legal action, but I'd like to start by telling you not to do it on the street at the time, but to remain calm, try to memorize what's happened, who did what, how they did it, when they did it, and then call the NAACP and seek legal counsel to pursue a civil rights case. You can also file a citizen's complaint, which each department is required to have under the law. I think the sheriff and the chief spoke to that. It should be a process where you are informed at the end of the process what occurs. There is a set of findings that you should be receiving a letter from the department about the outcome of your complaint. And the department is certainly free to go further and meet with you, meet with the chief, which I think they should do rather than just send a letter with a one line sustained, not sustained. The most important thing is to remember what happened and to contact the NAACP to help get counsel immediately to begin your process of the civil action. You can recover money, which is what a civil action is. And you can file a complaint, citizen's complaint with the department, and that would result in an employment action being taken against the officer if it is sustained.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Doug?
Yes.
My second question is this. Because you have defended the police, why do a lot of police officers get off? What is the reason, the main reason? Or why they're not? What happens in litigation as it relates to officers when they are sued?
I would say there's not a overriding single reason why they, quote, get off. I will say this, that the laws are written and the Constitution is interpreted in favor of law and order and against resistance, against situations where an officer's judgment has to be in a split-second, tense situation. The law says that the officer wins in that situation. And that is often the situation that an officer finds him or herself in when they use force. It's a tense situation. It's rapidly evolving. And when that's the case, their judgment is often accepted as reasonable, not always, but often, because that's the standard that the Supreme Court has set. The department is free to set a higher standard for its officers, but I'm not aware of any that have. I did hear Chief Jones speak to a little bit of doing that in his department, which was encouraging. The departments are free to raise the standard and should raise the standard, and what we're fighting for is to raise the standard that officers must follow before they can use force of any kind. Uh,
the de-escalation issue, but that wasn't clarified.
I'm sorry.
Can't hear you, Jerome.
No, that wasn't me. I think someone else commented.
Go ahead, Doug.
I'm finished.
Okay. All
Thank you,
right.
Doug.
Well, thank you both on those two questions, and we're going to move now into the general question session. And in this area, we will have First Vice President Deidre Davey handle some general questions that came in. And if time provides, we will also take a few more questions. We said we would do this up until 7:30. However, we will, if your questions are in the chat box, we will get those questions answered by the persons and get those answers back to you and post them on our NAACP Facebook page as well. But before Deidre starts, I'm going to cheat and slip in a quick question, and anyone can field it, whoever feels most comfortable. What kind of mental health training are your law enforcement agencies doing to suppress or work with people that are suffering from mental illness versus just being out there on drugs or way out? And how do you determine whether they're having a mental ill issue or a drug issue?
I can start that one if you don't mind, Mr. Bivens.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we've really bumped up, and you're seeing departments really.
Speaking, is this Chief Jones?
Yeah, sorry, this is Erik Jones from Stockton. There I am. Thank you. You know, many law enforcement agencies are doing this, and especially in this county. But we've definitely recognized a way to, or that there is a need to be able to better handle responses to folks in crisis with the mental behavioral health issue. It's something we talk with the district attorney all the time, with mental behavioral health services. So we do regular trainings. Now, in my opinion, we don't want our officers to be, and they cannot be, clinicians, but just some basic training that we do regularly so they can at least identify whether it looks like somebody might be in crisis. And we all know sometimes just the uniform itself could actually really make things worse for somebody going through an issue. So we were working toward also some response teams from behavioral health services where maybe it was more appropriate that they respond instead of police, because we're always sometimes expecting the police to be everything to everybody, and maybe we don't need a response, or maybe we want to respond with them. But these are things that we put at the top of our list at Stockton PD and really the county too, if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, if I could jump in, this is Sheriff Withrow. Yeah, absolutely. We spend a lot of time on this, and I heard somebody with the mic open talk about de-escalation, and this steps right in on that. And, you know, the question was, how can we tell the difference between mental illness or somebody under the influence? Often we can't, and you know, we don't necessarily have to all the time as far as on our initial response. We just have to know that somebody's in crisis for whatever reason it is, and we teach our guys, and all of us here in San Joaquin County do this, where we talk about, you know, trying to do the lowest level, and de-escalation is the biggest part of that. I'm fortunate that my first month in office, Post put out a thing about training for de-escalation. My captain literally wrote the book, the Post course on de-escalation. And now departments from around the state come and get trained by us on de-escalation. And so to us in law enforcement, we're just training our folks to know, because someone is in crisis right then, whether it's a mental illness or alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, or just a medical issue, is that we try and use that lowest level of force necessary and all those alternatives to try and get the person in custody and controlled as safely as possible. Then we get them to experts who can actually assess their medical condition and find out whether it's drug-induced or a health issue, whether it's diabetes or something like that, or mental issues. So we're all working very hard on that, and we're very proud of the progress we've made on that here locally.
All right, DeAndrea, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bivens. And I just want to remind everybody, if you're not talking, please mute your mics. Thank you. So the first question is, in 2019, California passed Assembly Bill 392 regarding modernizing the use of standards to increase public trust. Do you think this is working? And if not, what do you think needs to change? And so these questions can be answered by anybody on our panel.
Well, I'll jump in. It's a little quiet there. This Sheriff Withrow, I'll jump in on that. You know, I'm hoping that we've seen progress here in San Joaquin County as far as public trust. I think that comes with, you know, I hate the buzzwords and everything, but it really does come with transparency. And I think you're seeing locally here that we're trying to set a standard for California and the nation here, where we can be transparent about what goes on in law enforcement. We try and teach people ahead of time as to what is occurring and why we do the things that we do, so they understand better our reactions in situations. We hope that makes them safer. And then technology, as far as body cameras and cameras in our vehicles and cameras in our custody facilities, all those type of things that allows the public to watch and see what we're doing and judge us on our behavior. You know, luckily there was somebody in the Floyd case standing by with their cell phone. But we all here in San Joaquin County, and my agency was the last to get it, have the body cameras. And we have been very forthright with getting those out as quickly as we can, and being open and honest about what we do, and admitting when we make mistakes and try and do better, and weeding out those people. If we have cops out there that are intentionally doing bad things and hurting people, we don't want them here, and we want to weed those people out. If we have cops that make mistakes, we expect them to admit those mistakes, and then we'll move forward with a corrective behavior, whatever that may need to be, up to termination. But we're sure hoping that we're building trust. I hope things like this help, and I hope we show it by our actions on a daily basis with our citizens. And that kind of relates back to, if you're not being treated properly by all of the law enforcement here, I don't want to speak for all the chiefs, but we get together and we speak on a monthly basis. And I know they all feel the same, that we want to know if we have somebody who's not behaving as they're supposed to out there, and we will take that corrective action. I hope that kind of answers what you're looking for.
Yeah, so I do have a follow-up question to that, because a lot of times, like in this case, the officers were fired. And to a lot of people in the public, that might seem like a big step that the sheriff had taken. But if these officers go into another community, how would you vet them to make sure that they are not included in your force? Absolutely.
We go through an extensive background process, even for what we call laterals, people who come from other departments. And so just recently, I had an officer leave my department and went to another department. He wanted to come back here, so we did an extensive investigation as to why he wanted to come back. And I made the decision that we weren't going to bring that officer back to our department. So they go through a background process where we check on anything that's happened at other departments. And as I said before, nobody, you wouldn't want to buy a car that has problems. Well, it's even obviously 1,000 times more important here in law enforcement. We do not want to start with problems. We try and get good candidates and get them into our departments and train them up well. We don't want to start with problems. So we do an extensive background on those.
Okay, thank you.
With that question, if you don't mind me asking, Sheriff Withrow, it was a question in the chat. When you talk about training, what is the Sheriff's Department and other police agencies doing to recruit the community and young qualified African Americans into your forces, and making sure that they're receiving the proper cultural treatment within the ranks?
Absolutely. We have, it is a huge priority to me. We are so shorthanded here. As a matter of fact, when we talked to the NAACP yesterday, we sent over a flyer that we just opened up our cadet program. Those are for 18 years old and older. It's a paid program. You get like 13, 14 bucks an hour, and you come in here and you work and you start learning all the skills and tools that you need. We're doing everything we can to modernize our recruiting, because we're down about 125 people departmental wide. So we're looking for a cross section of our community. We would love to get people here locally who grew up here, who know our streets and our neighborhoods and our families, and get them in here. We're using professional companies now to tell us how to, instead of we're just a bunch of cops out there, you know, putting a sticker up on the side of a bus, we're getting advertising companies so that we're reaching the young people in our community through the stuff that I'm not really good at, Facebook and Twitter and all those type of things, so that we get our message out. So, and we go out, speak in public as often as we can. I know Stockton PD is always hiring. Tracy, I'm sure, is hiring. So all of us are looking for good qualified candidates, and we want them to be homegrown here. So we're trying to be as proactive as possible of that. And I can, again, don't want to speak for all the chiefs and everything like that, but we would love to have a very diverse community within our department that reflects our community outside our department.
Very, very good, Sheriff. And can I add something? This is Erik Jones.
Yes, go ahead, Chief Jones.
Yeah, just specific to some diversity, and I actually saw it in the column there, but to increasing our diversity, or just our Stocktonians, right, who automatically reflect our diversity in our school district. We have a long-term strategy plan, which is called the Public Safety Academy, where we actually are on site at the school and trying to get interest in the youth there. And it's sort of like an ROTC cadet program, so we can really homegrown our own. We have short-term strategies going out to NAACP conferences, places, but that's just one thing that's fairly new, and we think it's a way really to get youth interested early and staying with us when we can hire them later.
Bobby, can I say a couple of words? This is
okay. Dee is running this part of the session, so.
Hi, Dee. Just real quick. I'll be very brief.
Okay.
While I was on the city council, I chaired an ad hoc committee that worked very closely with Stockton Police Department on attempting to get African American, in particular, individuals to apply and seek a career in law enforcement with Stockton Police Department. I think what is very important is, as the chief said and what the sheriff said, those are the strategies that are being used, and they are very diligent in trying to recruit. But I think as leaders in the Stockton area and others, it's things that happened in the Arberry case and cases before this that people see, or our youth see, that a career in law enforcement is not something that they want to aspire to. So we need to really continue to encourage them that law enforcement is an honorable profession when done right. It's very much needed, and they can do a great service to their community if they would just seek that advocation going forward. I know when I first came on in law enforcement, didn't want to do it. I was talked into it. When I finally decided to take the test and I got hired, I was pleasantly surprised at the gratification, the service that can be done for your community if it's done the right way and working with the right people. So we need to encourage our youth to seek this position, which will help in recruiting tremendously.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Deidre, my team is expecting that we would be stopping at 7:30. We have a lot good questions in the chat box. And I want to say to our guests, if you can stay with us, we're going to run a little longer and try to answer some of these questions in the chat box to accommodate our community. And if you have to leave, then we understand, but we're going to run at least about another 15 minutes or so and allow these questions that Deidre has and the questions box, some of them to be asked. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bivens. Does the police and the deputy sheriff have yearly community justice training? And to your knowledge, what is included in the training? And anybody can answer that question.
So this is Chief Millington with the Tracy Police Department. I'm not sure if my video is running here. A little technical difficulties. You asked us about a community justice training. We actually run a Citizens Police Academy, one for it's an English program, and then we also have a secondary Hispanic Citizens Police Academy program, which is an opportunity for our citizens to learn about the police department, learn about our policies, to be engaged with our training, our reality-based training, as well as some laws that they wouldn't normally be familiar with. And I think that's a good opportunity at that time where I speak to them about justice in policing, as well as our policies as it relates to those topics. And so we have the ability of ramping that up and making it as robust. We look for a lot of input from our community, from my chief's advisory board on what the content of that academies is going to be. So we use that as an opportunity without having any specific training to that title that you mentioned.
You know, this is Sheriff Withrow. I'd like to jump in a little on that also. We too have the Citizens Academy, but we also have our ongoing training throughout the year. Sorry for the glasses here. You know, and probably Chief Jones won't toot his own horn here, but we teach stuff that Chief Jones, I talked about my guy writing the book on something, and Chief Jones was the one who wrote the book on principal policing. And we teach this to our folks, and it talks about, you know, historical and generational effects of policing, implicit bias, procedural justice, all these great things that we go through with our folks on a regular basis to make sure that we're covering all these areas so that we are engaged with our community and treating them properly, and it was his program that we're using, so it's an amazing program.
Thank you. The next question is, do you share a trauma, fear, and exhaustion from being Black in the country that continues to fail to recognize our humanity?
Yes. This attorney, Mark Harris, yes, absolutely. I started in this traumatic situation a long time ago. I wrote an article that was shared with the Stockton NAACP recounting my first experience with a matter similar to what's happening in America right now. I mean, the protests, the demonstrations, some would call it looting and rioting. Others of us would call it uprising. It started for me in 1965 in Watts, California. Again, as it turns out, in August of '65, with a CHP stop of an African-American gentleman who was accused of something and was roughed up on the scene, which then gave rise to what became the Watts riots of 1965. I walk around in constant trauma. So I don't think there's any African-American or any Latino in America who doesn't look over their shoulder, who doesn't get a special ice in their veins when that light comes on behind them with law enforcement. I have told all my young people that I have any influence over, make sure your camera is always ready to go in your phone. Make sure you don't mistakenly reach for your camera and have someone think you're reaching for a weapon, but everyone should be videotaping. If we hadn't had videotape of Arberry, if we hadn't had videotape of Floyd, if we hadn't had videotape of Mann, none of those cases would have been able to move forward. Mann was shot 17 times, 20 seconds after law enforcement confronted him. He was shot 17 times by Sacramento PD. If we hadn't had that on videotape, we would not have been able to bring justice to that family.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I have here is, do you believe that a diverse youth advisory committee should be established to brief law enforcement on youth issues, and if so, why?
Erik Jones here, yes. we're actually trying to do that. Working with Miles Harris on a youth empowerment strategy and a youth engagement strategy, and it needs to be diverse. And we've done a lot of work with hearing from our community and community voice and community advisory board, but candidly, we've just not reached the youth, and we haven't done it so in a meaningful enough way yet. So so we were just getting ready to roll out, and then the public health crisis started. We only got a couple meetings in, but we've got anybody who has ideas, please, on groups of youth that we can plug in, because that's I think the most critical age group right now that we need to be connecting with.
Hi, this is Tori, if I may jump in. We have a Youth Leadership Academy every summer. We're in our 20th year of doing it. It's going to be a little different this year because of COVID. But we have students from across the county come in for a 5-week course, and they see every facet of the criminal justice and the civil side of the proceedings. They will work with Dr. Ahmaud and now Dr. Hunter, and they'll go to a tour at the jail with Sheriff Withrow, and they'll also learn what it means to be a correctional officer, what it means to be a deputy. They'll be over at Stockton Police Department and doing SWAT training and learning the logistics of all of that, as well as learning about the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment. They'll attend court proceedings. They'll work with probation, parole, community-based organizations, substance abuse counselors, behavioral health counselors. And we do all of this to show, one, our youth in the community, the many jobs that are available in criminal justice, and as a part of our way to recruit and entice more representation within the criminal justice system, but also to empower them with the tools of what is and how does it work. And then from there, they take it back to their schools and teach different programming and different instructions, whether it be about human trafficking or policing and policies, things like that nature. And then they also sit all year long on a board and give us recommendations, and probably keep us a little more tech savvy than we would be without them. But so we do work with our youth, and I'm very grateful for the sheriff and the chiefs all contribute and help us in this program every summer.
Yeah, and this is Sheriff Withrow. I'll piggyback off of both the chief and the DA. We would love to be more engaged with our youth. Just like the gentleman said earlier there, I put out videos on what you should do on a car stop, and we need to teach our youth how to behave when around law enforcement so they stay safe, because we don't know what's going on when we roll up on something until we have time to figure it out. And so I went and spoke at Lord's Gym up on Hammers Way, and I said, please, whatever you do, if you're just hanging out and the cops roll up, don't take off running, because we don't know why. We may be responding to a call of shots fired or something. We don't know what's going on. So the more we can engage with our youth, the safer it will make it for them. The more they'll get to know us, those barriers will start to come down, and hopefully they'll, as the DA say, want to join us in a law enforcement and be that change from within.
Okay, so Didi, thank you. And I'm going to throw a question in here. And the question is, and hopefully some of you may have an answer, what type of training is being done to sensitize law enforcement to the LGBTQ community? Because we keep hearing that folks from that community are being abused, they're being intimidated. So we'd like to hear what type of training and vehicle you have in place for that community.
I could start on that one. It's Erik Jones again. So actually, when the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice came in, they helped us identify various populations within our greater community where we need to build trust better. And that was the ones that were right away were Latino population, as well as African American and youth, obviously, but then also the LGBTQ plus community. And so we did listening sessions. We've had them come in from the Pride Center and train our officers on sensitivity and terminology. And we continue to work with the Pride Center. They have a seat at our community advisory board.
Okay. Sheriff, any comment? Chief?
Yeah, we do the same on a regular basis. We have our ongoing training each year that all our officers go through. And we also have someone from the community come in and speak on those topics. And and work really hard also to reach out to that community to ask them to join our ranks also. So I'm a big believer in the more diversity we get within our department, the stronger it makes us. So we take that opportunity to reach out and learn from them, and then grow from that, and try and do a better job every time we encounter them out there.
Okay, well, thank you both. I'm going to step out, and Luana is going to bring questions from the chat box, as we promised to do, so that I understand there's some great questions in there. So, Luana, are you bringing the questions from the chat box?
Yes, and Brandon and some of the others are going to be helping as well. The first one is, when an officer gets reported for misconduct, how do we actually know that action is taken, truly taken, rather than a slap on the wrist? Anyone can answer from the appropriate department.
Well, this is Sheriff Withrow. As mentioned before, there's a procedure that we have to follow, and by law, we're required to accept the complaints and investigate them. And then at the end, you're notified. We don't tell you exactly what's going to happen to the officer, as was mentioned before by the attorneys, that there's a finding that he was either it was found sustained or unsustained, and so on. And you can reach out and talk to us a little bit about it. There's some that keeps information that we can't release, but we do have to follow up with those folks that complain, and if it's a formal complaint like that, and let them know the answer. And we try and take it a step further. If they're just calling in and say, hey, look, I don't want to fill out the paperwork, I just want to tell you how this officer treated me on a car stop or whatever. Then we have our sergeants contact the officer, review body camera footage, do an investigation, and then recontact again our reporting party to let them know what has happened in this investigation, find out if that's enough, or if they want to take it to the next level with a formal investigation.
Thank you.
And this is Chief Millington. We have a very similar process. We are mandated to follow up on formal complaints, and at the completion of those complaints, are required to notify the complainant with the findings. It's something we should and are required to do, and that's a standard policy here at the Tracy Police Department.
Okay. How many Black officers do we have on the City of Stockton Police Department and the Sheriff's Department?
Hey, this is Erik from Stockton. We'll start here. So I haven't checked our last numbers because they change on occasion. As you can imagine, we'll hire one, might lose one, maybe to another agency, which is always unfortunate. We're way too low as far as our numbers, but we've made increases by a few percent at least of comparison to the entire police department. But if I were to guess, I would say it's about a dozen. But I can get the exact numbers. We report out to the Civil Service Commission all the time.
And I was checking on that earlier, and we have about 6 or 7 Black officers out on the streets on our patrol side, and we have about 20-25 working on our correctional side.
I think it'd be important also I wanted to make a comment about the citizens complaint process. I heard someone mention that they never receive any information. The law prevents the departments from giving you any information except 4 standard responses or outcomes to your complaint. But the most important outcome that you're looking for is whether that officer is still employed by the department or not. And that is not information that they're prohibited from giving out. That's public record that you can get. And that'll tell you that they were not terminated for what the complaint was about.
Thank you, Dad.
Bobby,
just to put it out there, just so everybody can get the perspective of what we're talking about when we're trying to diversify our law enforcement agencies. We've been way too slow, and both the sheriff and the chief of police have acknowledged that. But when I started in 1971, there were 4 African Americans on the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Department out of about 450 officers. We haven't progressed much since then. That's been approximately 49 years ago. And we're talking to these single digit numbers as far as diversifying our law enforcement agencies. I was the first African American to work in the district attorney's office investigations division. One in 1991. That's in the history of San Joaquin County District Attorney's Office. I was the first African American to work there in 1991. So there's no question we have a long way to go. We're making progress, and I know that these law enforcement leaders that are in place now want to see their departments diversify, because they know that that is a real key to solving some of the issues that we have as we deal with the diversity that's within our communities here in San Joaquin County. But we have to be a little more diligent, I believe, and work a little harder because we have a long way to go.
Thank you. Says this is to Attorney Harris. Can you give us some concrete steps to transform our Citizens Oversight Committee? I think is what they meant.
Yes, I want to answer the question as best I can. There are a number of models. One of the things that happened in Sacramento recently is Sacramento did a survey of some of the models from throughout the country that had elements that they wanted. Every community should have its own input. Stockton should have what Stockton wants relative to this. Let me talk about a couple of elements that I think make sense. Number one, it was mentioned earlier, subpoena power. I think that makes absolute sense. There ought to be a forcing of the records. Mr. Zarif mentioned that at the very beginning of this. There ought to be a forced process to make sure that all of the records that can be disclosed will be disclosed. Mr. Thorn correctly mentioned that there are labor constraints and civil service constraints and any number of constraints that have to be taken into account. With a 30-year history representing officers, I'm sure he's more aware of those than I am. The police officers' Bill of Rights in this state is not going to be changed anytime soon. So the reality of the situation is we don't want to violate law officers, law officials' rights. Let me be clear, I don't. But I don't want them to have higher rights than everybody else. Right now, law enforcement has a higher level of civil rights than citizens do. I think that's wrong. And I think that the people of Stockton, if they really had this explained to them appropriately and carefully, would understand that police officers are entitled to equal justice under the law, not superior justice under the law, treating their law enforcement role as though it were a property right. I think that's where this thing needs to begin in terms of whatever would happen locally relative to citizens' oversight. And let me move half a tick back, though, to something that was said about AB 392. We worked very hard with the Assembly member, Dr. Weber, on AB 392. There were those of us in Sacramento, and both of the Bivens know how the local NAACP, which I'm involved with in Sacramento, worked to get one of the key elements of 392 implemented on a local level in SAC. It was the video recording. We were able to get a municipal ordinance passed that had 30 days of time in which the police chief had to turn over to the city manager and then to the council and the public video of a police shooting where there was deadly force, even if there was not a fatality. That then got absorbed into 392, we're happy to say. But the reality of that is if the police officer doesn't turn the video on or points the camera in another direction, all the video legislation in the world is not going to help us to see what we need to see to be able to evaluate whether those officers acted appropriately. The legal process in 392 is going to determine whether or not necessary force was used. It used to be reasonable versus necessary. Now it's necessary. There has to be a showing of necessary force. In order to be able to do that, you need records. You need access to records. And I hope that the city of Stockton, the residents of Stockton, will determine that this is important enough for them to follow up on relative to a citizens review process with teeth, with real teeth.
There's another process that's worked very well for another community, the city of Davis. About 10 years ago, there was a lot of strife in the community over police enforcement in the Black community, the Hispanic community. And the city council evaluated, tried to actually take the step to implement a citizens review. And there was a California Supreme Court case that said they could not do that. And they selected the model of an ombudsman for people with complaints about the police and police officer, the police department, some law enforcement matter. To schedule, they have an ombudsman, a full-time ombudsman that can be notified. We'll meet with the citizens. We'll look into their complaints. We'll include them in the process. It's a really good model for bringing the person with the complaint into the process without violating the officer's rights under state law. And I believe if you contact the city of Davis city manager, I know the ombudsman's still there. I believe it's the same one they hired when I was involved in the process. So it's been 10 or 15 years. And everybody involved, all of the communities involved turned out to really like and appreciate the police ombudsman. So that's another process that you can look at to help people understand what's happening with their complaints, how their complaints are resolved, what happens to the officers, whether they stay in the department or not. And oftentimes those complaints, I know on at least one occasion, resulted in a change of policy because it's good for the department to get the input from the ombudsman and to have a meeting of the minds as to what happened, whether it was fair, whether there was a racial element to it that needed to be addressed. It's a very good model. And
one of the challenges, Mr. Thorn, and I know this, there are plenty of other questions, but in Sacramento County, we had an ombudsperson who was the former police chief of Sacramento, who was fired when he came up with a report critical of the Sacramento County Sheriff. So even with an ombudsperson, you have the process. If the person deciding whether the ombudsperson can be honest and objective is the same person that the ombudsperson is looking over, if Sheriff Withrow is the one person who can determine whether the ombudsperson in San Joaquin County keeps their job, that defeats the whole purpose of having an ombudsperson in the first place. And that's what we found to be the case in Sacramento County.
True, the sheriff in this state has the power to say no to the ombudsman. The police chief does not, but the sheriff does. So, but I'm not talking about it in lieu of the Citizens Advisory Council. I'm talking about it as a compliment.
That's nice. I like that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you to all of the...
Mr. Bivens, we had one more, I think.
Want to go ahead? Okay, you have one more. Go ahead.
And that was from Deidre or Najee.
So I had a question here, and it says, what role does police unions have in the retention of officers with multiple complaints, and what should be demanded of them to eradicate this practice?
I can answer that as a former attorney for the unions. They play a very big role. They hire defense counsel, and they exert a great deal of pressure on administration to direct the resolution of complaints against officers in a manner that's favorable to the officer.
Okay. And that's the last word. That's a tough word you just laid out there, Doug. So again, I do want to, yeah, for real. I want to thank everybody that was involved tonight. I want to especially thank the NAACP Executive Committee members that have made this be successful: Najee, Deidre, Lawana, Brandon, Jerome, Reverend Green. Did I miss anybody? I hope not, or I'll be in serious, serious trouble. Breanna, and we will have some more of this discussion. The questions have come up on the screen. Can you do this some more? What, can we keep it moving? Can we go to the next step? And the answer is yes, we can. This is for the community, and it's part of our charge and responsibility to try to move policy and to influence policy within the community to bring about change and equity and equal access for all people. So we will do this. We will go back and meet and set another date and continue this discussion, but go into what are some of the remedies based on true and honest discussion, and having law enforcement look at it through the eyes of people that have been the victims rather than look at it through the eyes of the people that have been the victimizers. So I want to say thank you. As you see on your screen, the NAACP Stockton branch is putting a call out tonight. And we are asking all law enforcement agencies within San Joaquin County to immediately eliminate and have a no-neck restraint policy to be established by the Stockton and San Joaquin County, a ban on the use of knee holds and choke holds as an unacceptable practice for law enforcement officers, the implementation of a citizens review board, and for the city of Stockton and the county of San Joaquin County to employ subpoena power to hold each department accountable and build public trust. We're asking that you do not hire law enforcement personnel whose names appear on the Brady list or have been decertified. We're asking that allegations of police abuse should be investigated by internal affairs, but also have an outside independent agency. We love our DA, however, she has to depend on the local police officers to bring her the offenders of the law. That the standard procedure for the county, for a county-wide be defined, that they define excessive force for San Joaquin County, and that police officers should be vetted regarding their prior records for police misconduct and prior to being considered for being hired. We don't want somebody else's bad dog in our yard. And last, mandated, somebody's thing is up on the screen, I can't see. Take that out for me, thank you. A mandated psychological evaluation of police officers who had more than 2 excessive force violations and or a shooting incident. That is what the NAACP Stockton branch is asking for from the local law enforcement for San Joaquin County, starting at the DA's office and coming down to all the other agencies. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your support, your participation, and your honesty. We do want to have the tough conversations. We do want to push the envelope and change the way things are. This is an opportunity. The demonstrations that are going on now is a time for us to really reflect on how we have behaved in San Joaquin County and in America. And we improve that so that all people will have the freedom of not having fear whenever a police officer pulls behind them, that women should not be afraid for their children, or men should not be afraid for their lives, or that we're not intimidated because police officers pull behind us and ride behind us and then look over and keep going. So I just want to say thank you all. This has been a great, great meeting. And so I will say good night to everyone, and God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America. Good night.